Well, welcome everyone.
Welcome and bienvenidos.
We're so excited to introduce our first episode of our podcast. My name is Tiffany Green.
Hello, my name is Gisella Ojeda.
And we are starting this podcast to build off of what I think has been an amazing friendship that we've developed. And we've realized that we have some of the best conversations that we have with anybody else in our lives.
What I just believe is basically we're just bringing like our kind of daily conversations that are quite deep just to this format. We just decided, we were thinking like the kind of content that we discuss, the kind of conversations that we have is nothing that I usually have, it goes beyond of this like chit chat, and we just thought like, why not try to do a podcast? I think many people would also enjoy to listen to that, or maybe they also feel identified with.
Exactly. And one thing that Gisella and I talked about recently, before we decided to do this podcast, is why? Like, why are our conversations so engaging? Why can we talk for hours? And we realized that part of it was around the fact that we really appreciate and are genuinely inquisitive about each other's perspectives, backgrounds, experiences, and that it's not about, what Gisella thinks is right and what Tiffany thinks is wrong. It's about like, how do we take both of those experiences and bring it together for something that's even more beautiful, right? And so moving from this either or to a yes and.
Yeah, I mean, it's we are very different, right?
Yeah.
We are super different. We come from completely different backgrounds. Her first language is English. My first language is Spanish. And however, we enjoy to learn from each other. We like to see behind that. Or for example, I'm a very curious person, so I love to ask questions. I ask a lot of questions, I think. But I also learn a lot from a culture that, even though it's kind of next door, if I can say like that. I'm from Mexico, so she's from the United States, and you might think, you know each other, or you know what it is to be an American citizen or a Mexican citizen. At the end, is completely different. It turns out. So I love that.
Yeah, exactly, and super excited to bring that to you all and to launch this podcast that is all about appreciating, respecting each other, and what Gisella said, being curious, because that all most of the time will allow us to create more relationships and lead to a happier place.
And now you will be thinking, who are these two ladies sitting here? So I'm Gisella, as I said. I'm Mexican, born and raised in the north of Mexico, so it's bordered to Texas. I moved to Germany 14 years ago. I spent 12 years in Germany. I have a German citizenship by now. I have a German surname, a German husband. So I have to say, I have a bit of Germany also in me by now. Then I've been living in South Africa the last 3 years. It's been a journey. I love it. Here, I would say by now I have also adopted a bit of the South African culture, a bit of the African culture, a bit of the Afrikaans culture, maybe, just a bit here and there. So, that's basically summarize who I am. I am a mother. I have two kids, one boy and one girl. They are now 4 and 6. Very, very interesting and beautiful face. I work in the brand marketing area. I love social media, interact with people, languages, culture. That's basically me.
I love it. And so I'll give you guys a little insight into myself as well. So I'm originally from the US, from Michigan, and I have been living now in South Africa for about 5 years. I am married. I also have 2 rambunctious children, 8 and 9. No, they are not 1 year apart. They are right under 2 years apart. So as I mentioned, living in South Africa, but also lived in Djibouti, which some people know of, but it's a very, very small country.
Is it?
I know. And why is it Djibouti? So Djibouti is in the Horn of Africa. So it's It is bordered with Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia, and such an amazing experience. It's definitely a unique country, but with a lot of richness, and just really had a great experience there. And
Sorry, how long did you live there?
So I lived in Djibouti a year.
A whole year?
A whole year. Okay. Yes. My husband and I lived there for a year, and we actually lived in a containerized living unit. So for those of you who have ever seen shipping containers, they transformed that into our house.
First home in Africa.
Our first home. That's right. So, Gisella, I'm curious because, we both have had a lot of experience globally, but especially for you, right? You just mentioned and told the folks around you're Mexican, your husband's German, you've been living in Germany. I can't remember if you shared with them that you speak 3 languages.
Yes, so by now I do speak the 3 languages. Of course, Spanish, as you might hear, is my first language. By now I speak also fluent German just because I lived 12 years there. Yeah. I was working in German, in English as well. But I always believe if you speak the language of your host country, it opens a bunch of doors.
Definitely.
So that was always very important to me from the very beginning. Also to be able to understand my in-laws, very important. And then, of course, English at school, business. Now living here in South Africa, I was able to, polish a bit more. Now I do have maybe an Asian South African accent here and there, which I love. I also understand and speak a bit of Italian, but that's not very good.
I would also say, one of my big identities, which I think we connect over a lot too, is being a mother.
Yes,
and that's something that you'll have forever, for the rest of your life. And so having the opportunity to hopefully raise a new generation that changes the world, and that hopefully creates a little bit of the spark we want to put out in the world, even with this podcast, which is
correct.
How can we appreciate each other? How can we be more curious about each other? How can we step in each other's shoes and start to expand our thinking?
I think that's the biggest takeaway that we are getting now from living abroad, from having these multicultural experiences. And this is something that I think for both of us is very important to give and hand over to our children. For them, it's very normal, have friends of all colors, all backgrounds, different languages, and they navigate those waters pretty well, I would say, right?
Exactly. I think they do. And I think it's just natural to them, right?
Very natural.
Again, there's not any, this is right, this is wrong. It is we can do all these things, and all of our friends have different experiences and backgrounds. And it's just natural for them to appreciate that.
I think so, yeah.
So we're excited to introduce our first podcast topic, and it's something that we've been discussing for a while, and so we thought it would be interesting to bring to you all. And it's this concept of
third culture
kid. But I'm curious because
I don't know if people actually know what a third culture kid is.
Yeah.
I know, and I can imagine for many of my friends who don't necessarily live this kind of lifestyle, or if they doesn't have this background, they might be asking themselves, what is a third culture kid?
Exactly. And I know when we first had the conversation, it was so interesting because I had heard about it, and then Gisella, you had recently, right?
Yes, I was having a career coaching, and my career coach actually told me oh, your background is so interesting. Have you ever heard of this third culture kid?
Yeah.
There are podcasts, there is literature that you can read, there are TED Talks about it. And I got very curious about it. And then I just realized, we have been living this actually since day one in my family. I just didn't know there is a proper term for that.
I love that. And there goes that curiosity again that strikes up our conversations.
Exactly.
So let me share what Gisella and I talked about in terms of what we feel like a third culture kid is. And then we wanted to share a little bit of what our conversation was in case it's helpful for anyone that's listening today.
All right.
So when we think of a third culture kid, from a simplistic perspective, it is children that have a home country where they have a passport and that's where they were born and that's where their parents are and their parents had them. But then they also are living in a different country now, right? Which you may consider or hear about being called like a host country.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And so now they are picking up the different culture. They're learning different traditions. They may even be learning different languages.
Correct. They have then a mixed lifestyle, maybe just like a fusion of both worlds, creating maybe a third one.
Yep.
You know.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And then that third is the third culture. Kid.
Exactly. It can be that, or maybe it can also be like, for example, in my case, I am Mexican, so there is one culture. Then my husband is German. Those are two cultures that we live every day in our daily life, in our lifestyle, the way we think, the way we raise the kids. And then now we are living as an expat family in South Africa. So of course now comes into play a third culture, and then the mix of all of this, it makes them have a third culture present in their daily things, how they think, how they speak. So my kids now, they do speak English as their mother language, funny enough, you know. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely where it comes, the identity. How do you identify yourself? How do you keep all your cultural identities, although you are not living in your home country anymore?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really resonated with that when Giselle and I were chatting about this, because I think I was telling you how during Heritage Day. So for those that may not be familiar, in South Africa, there is a holiday called Heritage Day that's about celebrating all of the diverse heritages in the country. And my daughter was asked, who's 8 years old, was asked to fill out a little form on what her heritage was. And she filled out American and South African.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
And I'm not South African. My husband's not South African, but she's lived here 6 years out of her little 8-year life. And so
of course, for her now, definitely South Africa is a home country.
Yeah.
As of now, it might not have been at the beginning, but now it is. Also for my kids, if there is this Heritage Day where you just dress up like in your home country, they especially my daughter, the oldest, she would come to me and she would ask me like, oh, what should I wear? Should I wear like the Mexican dress, or should I go for a dirndl, the German typical Bavarian dress? And I'm like, well, it's up to you. How do you feel? And she's always like, yeah, I feel like both. And then if you ask my little boy, he's also South African, because we've been living here most of his life. So he feels South African. He knows the South African anthem. He would always speak to you in English, even in Zulu, some words. So that's the way he identifies himself as of now, just because the majority of his life he's been living here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something else that I love is, we have this opportunity to instill and help our kids understand like our culture, right? And so for you being Mexican, for me being American, and also help them understand the beauty of bringing in other cultures. One thing that my son does that I love is he is so particular to ensure that we pronounce all of his friends' names correctly.
Like friends' names, like, for example, African names or Afrikaans names.
Exactly.
Or French names.
Exactly. Exactly.
Interesting.
And so he tells me a lot, Mama, you have too much of an American accent, because I'm trying hard, but sometimes I can't get all the names correct. But I just think that's a testament to his like view of the importance of like someone's heritage. And like that is their name.
And to acknowledge that and not just like say the Americanized version or just like, say it, just give this importance to that, to the identity of the other person.
Exactly.
And just leave it as well.
Exactly. I think it's so important. And we also want to kind of keep that grounding for them. We make sure our kids know, like, look, yes, you are American. Both of your parents are American. One thing we didn't mention is that we both are also in multiracial relationships. So my husband is white American. Gisella's husband is white German. And so that's, also an additional piece in terms of our kids really appreciating and understanding there are different cultures, and you also have different colors, and we want to
Different
accept
races,
that.
different backgrounds, and that's beautiful. And it's for the kids, it's the most normal thing. They are growing up like that. They only know it like that. So their tolerance towards that is it's amazing, I'd say. Actually, I'm very proud of that. If you think about it, for them, it's like they are just not colors. They're just people.
Exactly.
As it should be, actually.
One of the things, though, Gisella, that I think is so cool about your family is that not only you speak, 3 languages fluently plus a 4th with Italian, but your kids speak multiple languages. And so I'd love for them to just hear a little bit about
It's been very interesting just because it's not easy. I have observed in my surrounding, let's say, with other friends, how other people do. And of course, you're not perfect. So you're always trying to figure out parenting. But then in our case, it's figure out parenting with this multicultural background, which is a bit more complicated because, okay, how you keep this cultural identity? So how do I bring my Mexicanness to my kids? How do we keep the German side? How do we nurture all of this? And also with the languages. So, of course, we were reading books, informing ourselves, and they always say, you should speak your mother language to your children because that's that's your language. You don't. Most of the time you don't make errors, it's just the language of your heart. So you just pass it on to your kids and you should stick to that. However, living abroad or living in our home countries, I have always seen people talking to their kids in other languages just because they want them to adapt faster to that environment, which might make sense. It can be at the same time also a bit confusing for them. So it depends. So what I personally did, I just spoke to them Spanish from day one. I always made sure like all my friends who spoke Spanish, they kept speaking Spanish to them, even though we were living in Germany, just because it's important for the children also to have more of a contact persons who they love speaking the language, because if I'm the only one, of course it's going to be a bit more difficult. Even though I'm the mother, it's still easier if you have more of a network of people like speaking the same language.
I love one thing I want to point out though that you said I think is so important, that I think helped this be so successful for you all, as you said, people that like they love helping speaking that language, and so it was around like that was their community. That was
exactly.
their, safe space.
The safe space where they can, play. So I always got sure, I always tried to make, for example, like play dates only in the one language, like Spanish play dates. Or now that we're living in South Africa, I always try to get sure that we do like German play dates or also Spanish play dates, just for them also to practice this switching between languages, and not only about languages, but also the culture itself. So, we also did things like, for example, at home, Peppa Pig. It was only in Spanish. There is no Peppa Pig in any other language for them. But maybe, I don't know, any other cartoon would be only in German. Just for them to be able to switch and just practice that and just learn more of the vocabulary whatsoever. Many people ask me also what is the language that we have at the table when we are eating?
Oh, that's a good question.
And that's a good question. That's a tricky one for us because I don't believe we do have like a standard language, just because my husband speaks fluent Spanish, I speak fluent German, so we're able to communicate in those two languages. At the beginning we didn't use any English because we both understands each other's language. So at the table it would be Spanish and German, so both. So if my kid is directing his question to me, he will always speak in Spanish, and then if he turns to daddy, he will always ask in German. An interesting part is, for example, you know my kids. Mia is very fluent in the 3 languages, whereas Luis clearly has a tendency to speak always more English. So he understands German perfectly and Spanish as well, and he does speak, but you cannot say he's super fluent in all of the 3 languages. I believe it will come a bit later. He's only 4 years old.
Yeah.
But my daughter, she's now 6, and she can switch in all of the 3 languages. Of course, maybe not always perfect, every grammar little thing, but who does it, right?
Definitely not me.
So at the end, it's possible, you know.
Yeah.
So she can think, and she even told me she can dream in a language or in the other one, which I think it's very interesting, very amazing, right?
And I think it has so much benefit on just kids' ability to learn when they, at a younger age, pick up multiple languages, right? And so it actually activates a different part of their brain. And
Totally.
So it allows that to be more active and expand like as they get older. So I think that's amazing. And I love seeing when Mia does this. So when Gisella has friends over, and it might be myself, who's American, obviously English, my first language. She'll have a German friend, German first language. She'll have a Latina friend, Spanish first language. And Mia will know what language to speak when she comes and speaks to each person, even though like they all speak English, but she will
address them in their native language.
Yeah.
I remember the time where we were celebrating my birthday, remember?
Yeah.
So it was this big table, and she came downstairs, and she just wanted to, greet everyone. So it was, as she said, like a friend of every different country there from my friends. And she came and she said like, hello, how are you? Good evening, in every language to everyone. And to me, it's so normal. I don't even think about it. But then you were saying like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And then it just made me think. Actually, it's not a regular thing to do.
Not at all.
It's just the way we live with this third culture kid environment, let's say, that makes it normal, if I could say that way.
Exactly. So one thing I think that would be really interesting, that I'm sure like you guys are interested in hearing, we've talked about, like we've experienced, is just how we have engaged and supported and nurtured our kids as they have been brought into this international expatriate environment, because it is different. I will say though, I think that if we could have more children having these types of experiences, it would do nothing but help us appreciate more different cultures and make the world a bit smaller. And it's not easy, right? You still do have to support your kids. So
I think it's also a lot of work in the background that you maybe don't see in the first place.
Exactly.
Or like many people would say, oh, amazing, you're going overseas, you're doing this. Oh, this is such a fantastic life.
Yeah.
But it comes with a big luggage as well. You know, it's not only nice and amazing and holidays and exotic and whatsoever. It's also challenging because it's, imagine if for us grown-ups, adults, it's difficult sometimes to cope, and not everyone can do that, certainly. For kids, it takes a whole new dimension.
A whole other situation.
Yes, and it's very important we as parents support the whole process with tools, whatever the kid needs, to make this transition easier.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And I think that, that emotional support is one that's really important, because at least just my experience with my kids, especially my daughter, is she can get very emotional, but I know that it comes from like a place of anxiety.
Yes.
Right? Where it's kind of like, oh, I'm in this new space. I'm not sure how to move through this space. I'm not sure how to engage with others. Or it may be initial, oh, this feels very different to me. And so what I have found that works well, and I'm curious, Gisella, to hear more from you, but what I found that works really well for my kids is the more that I have them around like diverse environments, the more comfortable that they are with that. So for example, when we lived even in the US before we moved here, they were around people that spoke different languages. They were around people that looked
already there. Right.
Exactly. Different from them. So I feel like when we came here, there was definitely
something,
shift.
sorry for interrupting, but it's something that you actively like push, so they are surrounded by this kind of diverse environment, or is something that is just because of that, just because in the States it's like that?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. Like, I think it was definitely something we valued. And so we moved to Johannesburg from Seattle, as you know. And there is diversity in Seattle, but not as broad as you may see diversity on the coasts in the US. So like DC or California or New York. So we did have to be a little bit more intentional when we were in Seattle around making sure our kids, especially as biracial children, that they had representation of people that also just looked different and weren't necessarily all like homogeneous. And so I feel like that has been a helpful piece in them being able to move around the world, even more seamlessly.
And did you do like something specific to ease the transition when you came from the States to South Africa with both of them? Because they were quite young.
They were young,
like almost 5 years ago or something.
Yeah,
so I don't know, did you do something actively, or were you just more like navigating with more of a common sense, or I'm curious about that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So my daughter was 2 and she just turned 3 when we moved. My son was 4 turning 5. And so I do think what we did more actively and intentionally was one, picked where we were living. So Giselle and I live in the same community in Johannesburg, and we wanted to live in a community where there were other children.
Yeah,
so that they could more easily
from day one be already in a environment because they can play and
I feel like it would have been a little bit harder if we were in a community setting, if we had like a standalone home, because then they kind of would have only had the school until we made friends and
you would be able to provide them with that.
What about you? What do you feel like?
That's a good question. So the kids were also quite young when we moved to South Africa. So I feel like we did also things quite like with an instinct, like just with our gut feeling. We were explaining them a lot, even though they were quite young. So Luis was not even 2 and Mia was not even 4.
Oh, wow.
Still, kids are able to understand and grasp a situation way more than we think.
Yep.
So we just do a lot of storytelling. I don't know if I can say it like that.
I love that.
That's what I always do. And now I'm starting to do it for our next phase, which I will talk about it in a moment. Just to maybe like create storytelling. Like, there are 2 little kids, Mia and Luis, who are 2 and 4 years old, and they are about to start a new adventure. They're going to South Africa, and just it gives them, I feel like, the sense of safety. This is happening. They know like what is going to happen, but it's still not them. They can like hear like as if it's like just a once upon a time, kind of storytelling. I don't know if that's right thing to do or not. It just works for us very good. We always have story time in the evening, so we would just use that time to also like tell these kind of stories. And like even like with a purpose mention like, okay, and these are the challenges that they might approach or they might not approach, but at least they have heard of that language wise, or maybe like, okay, maybe they want to play something that no one knows what is that just because it doesn't exist there.
Exactly.
Or houses look different, or okay, the weather is quite different. It's so many different things. So I think that helped. Of course, with the language already, we started like giving them a lot of English content, like books in English. Like they love audiobooks, so they would always hear audiobooks. That was everything in English. Also with friends, we used to have always a very diverse group of friends. So English was always a language that we use. So we did it a bit more on purpose at the beginning, just to help them with a transition, so they don't arrive and day one in South Africa and they are completely overwhelmed because they don't understand, they don't know, they don't know what to expect. And that helps with the anxiety that you were mentioning. And that's what I just realized. It helps, just to feel that they are a bit more under control, because kids, they have no control. Us parents are always telling them or guiding them. So at least if we give them a tiny bit of control, it helps. I don't know. That's what I did.
No, I love that. That storytelling, I think, is so important. And I feel like as parents, we have an opportunity to use storytelling more for children in terms of just teaching and learning and helping them to adapt. So I am super sad because Gisella is moving and is going to be leaving South Africa.
Once again.
I know. Once again, she's moving. And don't worry, we are still going to be doing our podcasts.
Oh, definitely.
We'll just be doing it virtually. So you'll still see both of us. But I think that, when we talk about the transitions of kids, it's like, how do we also support our children with the repatriation? And I'll tell you, for us, it's been more around supporting our kids as their friends have had to repatriate. And so that's also one of the challenges with having third culture kids is a lot of times they're connecting with other third culture kids. So other expats as well as local kids. And so some of those other kids that are expats, they're moving, right? They're relocating. And so I know that was something really big for Sebastian, my son. He had a best friend that relocated, and it was really challenging on him from an emotional perspective. And
I can imagine.
Yeah. And so one thing we had to do was just figure out ways in advance that they could stay connected and explain that ahead of time of like, we all have to go through these types of transitions.
So they know from day one, basically, that that's part of their life,
their
lifestyle.
Exactly. And there's so much beauty to it because it means that we meet all these amazing global people that we're going to have in our lives forever.
No, that's so true.
And it's just a matter, and we can be sad about it, right? I think it's also what we found is important to share with our kids. It's okay to
it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to be anxious or overwhelmed. So also to put a name on the feelings, you know? Because, of course, with kids at this age, so my daughter was 5, when she was trying to explain me that she was actually feeling anxious, but she didn't have a name yet to label this feeling. So, but she was able to tell me, like, I feel like I'm scared, but I'm not scared. I feel like my hands are kind of sweating, but I feel like not like nervous. So she was describing that. And then I realized like, oh, you mean you're anxious. So then I gave her like the name. And since then she's always able to tell me, oh, I'm feeling anxious. And I think that's very important for kids just to know what are they feeling, just to name the feelings and be okay with them and not just us as parents just to minimize, it's going to be fine, don't worry. Or, like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, of course, sometimes we tend to say things like that. But it's very important just to create awareness that, validate their feelings, especially going through big life-changing plans like a repatriation, a relocalization, going somewhere else. It's a big thing for all of us at the end.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they pick up too on our like energy, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so when, I think that like what you said, again, going back to that storytelling, when we can show up as, and you've mentioned this to me a lot, right? Like Mia will say, Mama, is that your happy tears?
Oh, yes. Like yesterday, she had an end of the year, like kind of send-off show, which they do is the end of the preschool. So it's the ending of an era, you can say. And of course, I'm a very emotional Mexican mother. So I was in first row, like, crying. And she looked at me from far and she did like this, like hand sign saying like happy tears. Like, I'm like, yes, happy tears. Yeah, it's fine. Like I want her to know it's totally fine to feel all of this. And it's just part of, but I always get sure that when I'm telling them, okay, we're moving back to Germany, or we might move to some other place in the near future, that I am talking from a place of excitement, from a place of curiosity, that I want to learn and that we're curious about it, and not from a place of doubt or of insecurity. Or I always get sure that I'm not talking negatively in front of her. Chatting to my husband, like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Oh my God, no, because I don't want to pass that to her. And I believe every change has something amazing if you decide to be happy and if you really want to be positive about it. Of course, with challenges. Of course, to move a whole family, your whole life in a container, your whole situation changes, weather, friends, circumstances, everything changes. But that's the life we decided to live, and that's the lifestyle we chose, right? So no one is forcing us at the end of the day. And it's actually a privilege
100%.
to be able to see the world in this form. Right?
I'm 100%. I totally agree.
So that's, to me, the biggest takeaway from living in South Africa, like to be able to meet also people who think like us or who share kind of a similar or even the same lifestyle like you guys or other friends that we have met. Like, it's just amazing. They understand, because of course some people, if you haven't lived this, how can you understand the magnitude, what it means? And then of course you also deal with your children, like, okay, they're going through these anxiety phases, and maybe the best thing is just to have a play therapy, just to help them cope with that. And there is nothing bad in it. On the other side, it's the best thing you can do to support them, and also just to learn as a parent, right? Like, how can I support my child better? Sometimes therapies are more for us parents
for the
exactly. The kids are more resilient at the end. And so,
it's so true. It's so true. So as we have come out of our discussion, there are a few tips that we're leaving with. And so I thought it would be helpful for us to share. So for me, I'm really leaving with two big tips around raising third culture kids. One is the emotional support. And so being there for your kids, making sure that they know that wherever this family is home, right? And that we will be there to support each other. I think the second big tip that I'm leaving with that I learned from Gisella is around storytelling and the importance of utilizing storytelling in transitions to really help kids understand how this can be exciting and new and fun for them. What about you, Gisella? Did you take away any tips?
Yeah, definitely that what you mentioned. And I also think like the importance of keeping the cultural identity. Like just do your best to bring this to your table. Like, always, for example, like your own food, cook it, present it for your kids, your language, your stories, maybe the stories that you heard when you were a child, like all of these little parts of this big puzzle, like just bring them to the table and always just keep it present. Don't forget about it. That's what makes you. And it's, I think one of the most precious things is just to be able to pass it on to your kids. You and then the other part, for example, my husband, also the other side.
Yeah, I love that. So we hope that this was helpful. We hope that you all enjoyed this time. And we look forward to